Your legacy mindset is dragging us down. HR wants you. Now.
You will regret this.
The knock on my office door hit like a verdict, 3 sharp taps, too urgent, too rehearsed, the kind of knock people use when they're about to ruin your career before finishing their morning yogurt. I looked up, still holding my coffee, only to see a junior HR rep standing there stiff as a malfunctioning warehouse robot. Mr. Knox, they need you in HR. Now. She didn't blink. That was my first clue. Walking toward the glass-walled HR suite, I felt the familiar hum of Northbridge Logistics around me, the automated conveyors, the gleaming dashboards, the signature scent of coffee and quiet panic. I'd spent 27 years keeping this company from collapsing under its own ambition. 3 system crashes avoided, 2 national outages prevented, 1 CEO rescued from a disaster of his own making, and somehow, none of that earned me even a courtesy email. What do you think is going to explode next in this lovely little corporate circus? And I'd also like to know where in the world you're listening to this story. It saddens me to know that 95% of you who are listening aren't subscribed to this channel. Now, I need your support to keep me motivated to write more and more great stories. Hit that button and come back to the room with me. Inside the room sat Mason Keller, our freshly minted COO and CEO Graham Whitford's 31-year-old son-in-law, a man who proudly proclaimed he understood systems because he'd taken 1 online course in supply chain architecture. Across from him was HR Director Luann Brooks, holding a folder thick enough to double as a doorstop. "Tyler," Mason began, leaning back in the chair like he'd invented confidence itself. "Your role no longer fits our modern operational vision. We need leaders who aren't stuck in legacy thinking." Legacy thinking. That was cute. I stayed standing. "You're firing the person who built the system you're modernizing?" "It's not personal," he replied, which of course meant it absolutely was. "Effective immediately. Northbridge Logistics is eliminating your position. Security is packing your desk." I opened the folder. Termination packet, severance, a non-compete aggressive enough to make a prison guard blush. And at the very bottom, a single acknowledgement page requiring 1 signature. I took out my fountain pen, the same one tied to Northbridge's old charter protocols, and signed just that 1 page. Only that page. Mason didn't notice. Luann didn't question it, but as I recapped the pen, a quiet thought settled in. "Congratulations. Kid, you just triggered Clause 14B, the one clause you never bothered to read." I nodded politely, almost cheerfully. I know the way out. The strange thing about getting fired is how quiet everything becomes afterward. No shouting, no slamming doors, just a soft, oddly polite silence that settles around you like a thin layer of dust. When I stepped out of the HR suite, the hallway felt wider than I remembered, almost hollow, as if the building itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. I took a slow breath, steady and measured, and began walking toward my department with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose and 1 last joke left in his pocket. The first group I passed were 3 junior analysts huddled near the break room, laughing loudly about a new KPI they clearly didn't understand. "Engagement, throughput, velocity," one of them said, waving his hands like he was conducting an orchestra of nonsense. The irony was almost poetic. Northbridge Logistics had once measured success by shipments delivered and crises prevented. Now it measured by buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. I kept walking, offering them a polite nod, though none of them noticed. They were too busy pretending to be important. As I moved deeper into the building, I caught glimpses of the new culture Mason Keller had been so proud of, sleek collaborative spaces filled with people who had mastered the art of appearing busy while doing very little. They had enthusiasm, sure, but no understanding of the machinery running beneath their feet, the machinery that I had spent nearly 3 decades building, patching, shielding, and ironically protecting from people exactly like them. It wasn't modernization. It was inheritance. The company wasn't evolving. It was being rearranged to fit the family tree. That realization landed with a dull, unsurprising weight. I'd suspected it for months, the sudden promotions, the quiet reshuffling, the newly minted operations strategists who were related to Mason through marriages I'd never heard about. Northbridge wasn't becoming more efficient. It was becoming more convenient for the right last names. I turned a corner toward the elevator bay and instinctively reached for my badge. Habit. Mostly, HR had said it would be disabled immediately, standard procedure, a digital guillotine. I pressed the badge to the scanner anyway. Click. The green light blinked. The gate slid open. I stared at it for a moment, a small, bitter laugh catching in my throat. Of course, the company that bragged about precision automation couldn't even deactivate one badge properly. A classic Northbridge oversight, a system update scheduled but never executed. Lost somewhere in the labyrinth of tasks assigned to someone who probably thought admin access was a brand of energy drink. I stepped through the gate slowly, almost ceremonially. Not because I needed to, but because it felt good. It felt right. If the building wanted to pretend I still belonged here, I wasn't going to argue. Not yet. By the time I pulled out of the Northbridge parking lot, the sting of the morning had settled into something quieter, not anger, not panic, just a steady awareness that the ground beneath me hadn't vanished, it had simply shifted. I drove through the industrial district with the calm precision of someone following a map they drew years ago. Each turn brought me closer to the place where the old Northbridge still lived, the version built on structure, caution, and a healthy respect for paperwork. My storage unit sat at the far end of a weathered row of metal doors, each one faded by sun and indifference. Unit 27B. I hadn't opened it in years, but the keypad still accepted my code on the first try. A small reminder that not every system forgets you just because a 31-year-old with a wireless charger for a personality decides you're obsolete. The door groaned upward, releasing a faint smell of old cardboard and colder memories. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, stacks of binders, crates labeled with years instead of names, boxes filled with printouts from the era when paper trail meant survival. And tucked behind a metal filing cabinet sat the real reason I came, the reinforced storage case I'd hauled here during the acquisition scare 7 years ago. Back when CEO Graham Whitford trusted me enough to ask what protections would actually keep us safe. I knelt, brushed off a thin layer of dust, and unlatched the metal box. The hinges creaked, like they were waking from a long nap. Inside lay a thick folder, the label still crisp in dark ink, Equity Reversion Protocol Clause 14B. I ran my thumb along the edge of the first page, remembering the night Graham and I drafted it. The company had feared a hostile takeover from an overseas competitor. Our solution was clever, airtight, and ironically designed to protect Northbridge from impulsive executives. Clause 14B outlined a chain reaction if any key systems officer was involuntarily removed by a member of the CEO's immediate family. A silent reversion process would activate, transferring temporary governance authority to the systems architect of record. Back then, it felt theoretical, a safety net no one would ever fall through. Until this morning, I read the line again. Familial executive action constitutes a valid trigger. CEO Graham's son-in-law, COO Mason Keller, had fired me, retroactively, with paperwork signed and time-stamped. A slow realization moved through my chest, not triumphant, not vengeful, just solid, grounded, almost inevitable. I had spent years protecting Northbridge from outside threats. Today, the threat had come from the inside, and without knowing it. They had placed the countermeasure directly in my hands. I closed the box gently, as if sealing a contract with myself. For the first time that day, I felt not discarded, but prepared. I left the storage unit with the metal case tucked under my arm, its weight strangely reassuring, like carrying a fire extinguisher into a room where everyone else insisted nothing was burning. The next step was obvious, almost procedural. If Clause 14B was a loaded mechanism, then someone had to verify the trigger. And there was only one man I trusted with that kind of responsibility. Conrad Hale. Conrad's office sat between a shuttered travel agency and a bakery that smelled like regret. No fancy signage, no receptionist rehearsing small talk, just a battered brass plate on the door and blinds that never seemed fully open. He preferred it that way. Conrad was the kind of attorney who didn't need marketing. His wins were the advertisements. When I stepped inside, the room looked exactly as it always had, dim lighting, stacks of legal volumes arranged with surgical precision, and a faint hint of ink that seemed baked into the walls. Conrad sat behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, reviewing a contract with the calm intensity of someone defusing a bomb for sport. He glanced up once. Tyler. That was the greeting. No handshake, no sympathy, no unnecessary syllables. I placed the metal case on his desk and opened it, sliding the folder toward him. Clause 14B. We need to verify it. He adjusted his glasses, then began reading silent, meticulous. Each page he turned felt like a lever being pulled somewhere deep inside a machine. After several minutes, he closed the file gently, almost respectfully. "It's valid," he said, "still binding, still notarized, not revoked." I nodded. I had expected that, but hearing it aloud was different, cleaner, sharper. Conrad leaned back, folding his hands. "If activated, Tyler, you become the controlling authority over the Northbridge Systems Equity Trust, temporary governance, strategic oversight, and operational veto." Cold strategy settled into place inside me, piece by piece. I wasn't just holding a clause, I was holding leverage calculated, legal, and irrefutable. But then Conrad paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, his version of a raised eyebrow. "There's more." He reopened the folder, tapping a particular line in Mason's recent operational reset memo. "Your new COO," he said, "made a mistake." "Mason," I asked. Conrad nodded once. He signed this without reading the attachment. "This update technically reclassifies your role as a protected systems position." Only the CEO can approve termination, but because Mason acted alone, he invalidated Graham's authority in the chain of command. I stared at him. Meaning, Conrad said, with what might have been the faintest ghost of a smile. "Your firing wasn't just rash, it was structurally illegal. And that strengthens Clause 14B even more. Cold. Precise satisfaction settled over me. The board thought they'd removed me from the equation. But Mason, without knowing it, had rewritten the entire equation in my favor." Back on the sidewalk, I paused for a moment and let the city's rhythm wash over me. That steady pulse of engines, footsteps, and lunchtime conversations carrying on as if my career hadn't been severed 3 hours earlier. It was strange, standing there in the middle of Northbridge Plaza, realizing that almost everything moving around me, delivery trucks, routing algorithms, inventory trackers, shipment predictions, ran on the frameworks I had built. Not the glamorous parts of the city, not the skyline or the bright ads overhead, but the machinery beneath it all. And yet, despite 27 years of engineering that backbone, I was now a man without an office, watching the world run on autopilot while the system I once protected began quietly shifting its weight. That tension pressed into my chest, not panic, just an electric awareness that something enormous was already moving in the background. I leaned against a stone railing, pulled out my phone, and saw the first notification roll in Equity Trust 6A governance update in progress. The bar showed 72%. A heartbeat later, 79. Then 88. Each number felt like another turn of the key, another bolt sliding into place, another reminder that Clause 14B wasn't theoretical anymore. It was alive, breathing, arming itself in real time. A gust of wind pushed through the plaza, carrying the smell of roasted peanuts from the corner cart, and for a moment the ordinary noise of the city clashed with the quiet storm forming in my pocket. People kept walking, completely unaware that a corporate fault line had already begun to crack open beneath Northbridge logistics. Then another alert surfaced, one that should have been impossible. System access log activity detected on legacy administrator account user T. Knox. I blinked, half amused, half appalled. It had forgotten to revoke my old system access, the same access that tied directly into the architecture Mason bragged about modernizing but still didn't understand. It was negligence, sure, but also opportunity. I straightened, sliding the phone back into my jacket as the update bar climbed toward completion. 93%? 98? The city moved around me with perfect indifference, unaware that the system beneath its daily routines was quietly realigning its loyalties. And I stood there in the middle of it, all steady, silent, and bracing for the moment the numbers would finally reach 100. Somewhere in the distance, a freight truck rumbled over a bridge, a reminder of how many moving parts depended on systems I had stitched together, one crisis at a time. I could almost hear the hum of servers across town, the heartbeat of the infrastructure I'd spent years maintaining steady, loyal, indifferent to the politics now tearing management apart. Another vibration buzzed in my pocket, sharper this time, as if the system itself were tapping me on the shoulder. The message was short, clinical, unmistakable, governance sync imminent. Prepare for administrative confirmation, I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension draw a precise line down my spine, a line that pointed not toward fear, but toward inevitability. It was coming. When the final notification faded from my screen, A quiet certainty settled into place, cool, grounded, and strangely liberating. I tucked my phone into my coat and began walking back toward the Northbridge Tower. The same building that had dismissed me hours earlier, and yet somehow still pulsed with systems carrying my fingerprints. The revolving doors whooshed open as I approached, and for a second I wondered if the badge would finally reject me. It didn't. The scanner blinked green without hesitation, as if greeting an old friend. The security guard, a young man still trying to grow into his uniform, straightened in confusion. "Mr. Knox, I thought I'm here for the board meeting," I said calmly, stepping through as if the building itself had invited me. The guard's expression hovered somewhere between concern and awe, but he didn't stop me. Quiet power works best when people can't quite identify its source. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt different than usual, slower, calmer, almost ceremonial. When the doors slid open, I walked into a hallway buzzing with last-minute preparations. Assistants hurried between rooms, balancing binders and tablets. Voices drifted from behind closed doors, finance arguing with operations, logistics arguing with reality, business as usual. Then I saw Mason Keller at the far end of the corridor. Standing in front of conference room A, he was rehearsing a speech to an empty room, his reflection nodding approvingly in the glass. The slide on the projector behind him read, "Northbridge 2.0, a modern operational vision," bold title, empty substance. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and practiced a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He didn't notice me at first. Why would he? In his mind, I was gone, deleted, archived, erased from the system by 9:10 in the morning. But when he finally turned and saw me walking down the hallway, his face twitched in a way that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't confidence either. Something in between. "Tyler, you shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, uncertain. I offered the faintest hint of a smile. "Then it's fortunate I'm still on the calendar distribution." He blinked, confused. The calendar system was one of the modules he never understood. And the one thing about quiet power is that it grows strongest in the gaps created by someone else's ignorance. I stepped into the boardroom before he could gather a response. The chairs were arranged, the microphones tested, the water glasses filled. And there, humming softly on the wall, was the projector already connected, already syncing with the central governance panel. Mason had no idea that his presentation file was quietly being replaced in the background, overwritten byte by the same system he claimed to be modernizing. The title on the screen flickered, just for a moment so brief that Mason would dismiss it as a lighting glitch. But I knew better. Systems don't flicker. They warn. I took my seat at the table, calm, composed, and entirely invisible to those who underestimated me. The real presentation was already on its way. The boardroom always had a certain temperature, slightly too cold, intentionally uncomfortable, designed to keep people alert, but as the clock crept toward 1 o'clock, the air took on a different kind of chill, the kind that settles in right before something irreversible happens. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, hands folded, as executives filtered in with the slow confidence of people who believed they understood the agenda. They didn't. Not today. Mason stood near the projector, rehearsing his opening line under his breath. Every few seconds, he tapped his tablet, checking for last-minute updates to his Northbridge 2.0 pitch. His arrogance had a rhythm to it. Tap, inhale, smooth the tie, force a smile. I watched him without watching him, the same way you would watch a fuse burn down a few inches at a time. The board chair called the meeting to order at exactly 12:59. Papers shuffled, tablets blinked awake. A few executives murmured greetings, their voices low and polite. I could feel the weight of the moment tightening, like the room itself was bracing for impact. Then, the second hand snapped to 12. 1 o'clock. The projector didn't flicker this time. It seized command in an instant. Mason's slides vanished, replaced by a stark white screen with a single line of text spreading across it like a verdict equity reversion protocol, effective immediately. Silence slammed into the room, not the kind born from confusion, the kind born from recognition. Mason's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He looked at the screen as if it had personally betrayed him. His face drained of color when the next line loaded automatically. Trigger condition. Involuntary removal of a protected systems officer by an individual with familial ties to the CEO. The entire board turned toward Mason in slow, synchronized horror. like a tide shifting in one direction. His voice cracked. This must be a mistake. This clause wasn't meant to activate, but the projector wasn't done. A soft chime rippled across the room as another line appeared at the bottom of the screen, time-stamped and merciless. SEC notification delivered 12:57 p.m. 3 minutes earlier. 3 minutes before anyone in the room knew what was happening. The board chair's tablet buzzed violently, followed by the CFO's, then legal counsel's. A cascade of alerts lit up every device around the table. The CFO's face slackened as he scanned the data feed. Oh no, he whispered. It's real. The transfer has already begun. Mason staggered backward from the projector like the screen had lunged at him. No, this can't. Tyler didn't even sign anything. Binding legal counsel swallowed hard. He signed exactly what Clause 14b requires. The impact wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was absolute. The structure of Northbridge began collapsing in on itself, not with chaos, but with precision. Process by process, authority by authority. And I sat there, incomplete. Quiet stillness as the room finally understood that the detonation they were experiencing had been built 7 years ago. The fallout from the detonation was still rippling through the room when the boardroom doors burst open so violently the frosted glass trembled. CEO Graham Whitford stormed in with the breathless outrage of a man who'd sprinted down the executive hallway, a hallway he normally strolled through like royalty. His face was flushed a deep, furious red, and the moment his eyes locked onto the screen, the anger drained from him in visible stages. He froze, completely. There, projected in merciless clarity, was his own signature, dated, notarized, validated, sitting beneath the clause he had once insisted we draft just in case the world ever lost its mind. 7 years ago. He'd said it with a laugh. Today, the laugh was gone, replaced by a slow dawning horror that crawled across his expression. His gaze shifted to Mason, who stood pale and trembling near the projector, looking like a child who'd accidentally pushed the big red button labeled, "Do not touch." "What?" Graham said through gritted teeth. "Did you do it?" Wasn't a question. It was an autopsy. Mason opened his mouth, air stuttering out. I was restructuring. It wasn't personal. I was modernizing. Modernizing, Graham roared. You fired the system's architect, my system's architect. The room shrank under his voice. Even the air seemed to hold still. He stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward the screen. This clause activates only if a protected officer is removed by a family member. You are my son-in-law. Do you understand what you've done? Mason only managed a sharp, helpless inhale. The board members exchanged looks that blended disbelief, fear, and a certain quiet satisfaction, because even they understood that this catastrophe had been handcrafted by nepotism, meeting incompetence. Legal counsel cleared his throat. Sir, the SEC has already acknowledged the activation. The transfer protocol is in its final phase. Graham whipped around to face him. Reverse it. We can't, the counsel said softly. Clause 14b is irreversible once triggered. The governance rights are reassigned. As to whom Graham snapped, the projector answered before anyone else could. The screen updated with a single cold line of text: Administrative Authority, Tyler Knox. The silence that followed didn't just fall, it dropped, heavy and complete. For a moment, Graham simply stared at the words as if he could will them into disappearing. But systems don't respond to disbelief, only to design. And I had designed this one with precision, slowly. He turned toward me, not with anger, not even with confusion, with recognition. You knew, he whispered. I met his eyes, steady and calm. I remembered what you forgot. His shoulders sagged, the weight of the morning settling onto him all at once. There was no shouting now, no accusations. Only the sharp, undeniable truth that the chain reaction set off by his own family had placed the company's reins directly in my hands. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly in black ink, old signatures, and a system doing exactly what it was built to do. For a long, suspended moment, no one in the boardroom moved. The screen bearing my name glowed across the polished table, its reflection stretching over documents, water glasses, and faces that had turned the color of ash. The shift wasn't loud or dramatic. Nothing collapsed. Nothing burst into flames. But something deeper, heavier, older than all of us, rearranged itself in that instant. A fortress built on hierarchy and inherited power had silently tilted, and every person in the room could feel the floor slide beneath them. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence breathe. There was no rush now, no need to raise my voice or posture for dominance. Power, real power, didn't require theatrics. It simply existed quiet, grounded, inevitable. The board chair finally cleared his throat, though his voice cracked like an old hinge. "Mr. Knox, what exactly are your intentions?" Intentions. The word hung there like a diplomatic gesture at the edge of a cliff. I let out a slow exhale, almost gentle, and rose to my feet. Every eye followed. Mason flinched. Graham didn't even blink. I walked toward the screen, not because I needed to, but because the movement steadied the room, anchored it. When I finally turned back to face them, the tension that had lingered in my chest all day lifted, released. Clean. Almost refreshing. "You spent years building this place up like a fortress," I said quietly. "Layer after layer of control, titles, access, loyalty measured in family ties instead of skill." No one spoke. Even the HVAC seemed to hush. "But you forgot something important." I paused, letting the words settle. "You forgot who laid the foundation you're standing on." A ripple passed through the room somewhere between shame and realization. Graham lowered his eyes. Mason looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't desperate or vindictive or even triumphant. What I felt was release, a deep uncoiling inside me, the slow restoration of something that had been taken without thought and returned without ceremony. And then it happened. My phone buzzed, soft, precise. A single notification slid across the screen: governance panel update. You may appoint or remove executive leadership. A collective shiver moved around the table. The board chair actually reached for the edge of the table, as if steadying himself. Mason let out a tiny sound, half breath, half plea, but I only slipped the phone into my pocket. I wasn't here to make a spectacle. I wasn't here to burn the place down. Power doesn't always demand destruction. Sometimes it only asks to be recognized. "Gentlemen," I said, gathering my notes, not that I needed them, but it felt right. "I'm not issuing demands today. I'm simply acknowledging what already happened." I stepped away from the table, toward the door. "Fortresses don't collapse," I added softly. "They just change owners." And with that, I walked out into the hallway, steady, unburdened, and finally free. The hallway outside the boardroom felt different, now lighter, quieter, almost relieved. For years I had walked that same corridor carrying more responsibility than authority, keeping Northbridge's systems alive while executives debated buzzwords and family politics. But this time, each step felt like shedding an old skin. Not vengeance, not triumph, something simpler, cleaner, rebirth. Employees looked up as I passed analysts, coordinators, supervisors' faces stretching from confusion to shock to something I didn't expect: awe. Word had already spread, traveling faster than an internal memo ever could. In their eyes, I wasn't the man who'd been fired this morning. I was the man who had just changed the architecture of the entire company without raising my voice. I didn't linger. Quiet power doesn't gloat. It moves. As I approached the glass exit doors, my badge still active because someone in IT had trusted the automation queue more than common sense, gave one final friendly beep. The lock clicked open with the politeness of a building wishing me well. Fitting. Really. Northbridge had spent years treating me like a tool, but today it held the door for me like an old friend who finally understood its mistake. Stepping outside, the afternoon sunlight hit me with a warmth that felt almost symbolic, no longer fluorescent corporate white, but something real, something earned. A breeze brushed past, carrying the sound of traffic and the hum of delivery trucks running on systems I'd built, systems that would now answer to me, whether the board liked it or not. I reached the edge of the plaza just as my phone buzzed. A single message lit up the screen. "Welcome. Tyler Knox, you now hold controlling interest. No fireworks, no confetti, just a quiet sentence that changed everything." I exhaled, steady and unhurried. The weight I'd carried for decades holding the company together while others took the credit finally loosened. The company that thought it could erase me had handed me the keys instead, and right as I slid the phone back into my pocket, another alert appeared, almost shy in comparison. Appoint new CEO pending your confirmation. So that was the twist. Not only ownership, not only authority, but the power to choose who led the company I once salvaged in silence. I didn't tap it, not yet. Power used too quickly becomes noise. Power used wisely becomes structure, and I'd always been better at building than destroying. I kept walking, leaving Northbridge's tower behind me not as a defeated employee, but as the architect of its future, reborn, realigned, released. And as I moved through the sunlight, one thought rose above everything else. Sometimes justice doesn't march in with flames. Sometimes it walks out the front door with its head high. And when the moment comes, the strength you carried quietly becomes the force that sets you free. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know where are you listening from right now. And if you enjoyed this journey of justice, resilience, and a little corporate karma, don't forget to like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories travel a little further, just like quiet power finally getting its moment to speak.